Hello to everyone, and welcome to In Their Shoes, a podcast that deals with social issues around the world. We've had a little break in the action. We haven't been with you since February. As you recall, we've done a number of things regarding homeless women, dealing with hunger issues. We talked about the role of not-for-profits, and a number of other things that we think have been important. Today, we're going to shift gears just a little bit and get pretty specific in talking about some of the things that we are concerned about at Heart Sounds. So today's show is going to be focused on refugees and some of the differences that we have between how we treat refugees in the United States or even Europe and how they get treated in Uganda. Very happy to have with me today John Paul Agaba. John Paul is one of the founders of Heart Sounds US, located here in Marlborough. He's a former Fulbright scholar, where he taught public health in Albany, New York, and now he's a doctoral student studying health education. And as I said, one of the founders of Heart Sounds and one of my closest advisors on a daily basis. So welcome to the show, John Paul.
Thank you.
I'm glad to have you here with us.
Thank you very much, and I'm happy to finally get to do my first podcast.
Terrific. Well, the people at WMCT-TV here are terrific. As you know, they support what we do, and we certainly appreciate all of the good things that they provide to us. Yeah. So to talk a little bit about today's topic, refugees, and you and I have had this conversation a few times, and I'm still learning about it. In the United States, the concept of refugee we see on a daily basis. We see people trying to get into this country, and we really resist them coming in. Without getting into the politics of it too much, there's the blue and the red about it. The blue saying, well, we should let people into the country. The red saying we should keep them out. But in Uganda, we have I've seen a very different approach to refugees. So maybe just give us a little bit of an introduction to what that's all about.
Yeah. Well, it goes back to the history of our colonial days and movement of people in Africa prior to the colonialists. Most of the groupings, for example, in East Africa, are Bantu people who migrated from mid-Congo, Brazzaville, and kept moving east. And you find that there is a lineage of relations over centuries. Mm-hmm. So when you come to colonialism and forming of governments where borders were created and nations formed, you find that a good example is like a family could be in both Rwanda and Uganda.
Oh, okay.
Because the borders were just more or less imaginary. Families were cut across. And so that alone builds onto the response to refugees. Looking at the terminology of refugees, actually, in Uganda is a current phenomenon from the 1951 convention, where the UN now kind of puts it into writing that, okay, this is what a refugee is. Mm-hmm. That's when now in Uganda we start looking at people as refugees. But relatives crossed to Rwanda even before crossing to what Rwanda is now, you would say that was the Chwezi Karagwe Empire, which would go across Tanzania, Uganda, depending on the tribe.
Yeah.
So that's why you find different tribes or one huge tribe in 3 or 4 different nations. Mm-hmm. So when war breaks out, for example, in neighboring Congo or in Rwanda, these people already have long time movements that they conducted. For example, the pastoralists, who are the Hima in Ankole, which is the part of Uganda, the Tutsi in Rwanda, and the Banyamulenge in Congo, are literally the same people. Mm-hmm. So during the dry season, they would cross to Rwanda if it's dry in Uganda. Then if it's dry in Rwanda, they cross to Congo, to Tanzania.
So it's really interesting what you talk about because we sort of like draw a lot of lines, a lot of borders.
Yeah.
We cross the border from Massachusetts to New York,
Yeah.
and certainly when you look at the Mexican border or the Canadian border, we see those as really like literally written in stone lines. We build walls, we do that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And what your point of the fact that the borders are pretty open, porous.
Yeah.
People do go back and forth, and the borders were created to really respond to the colonists, or the people who colonized, wanting to divide things up.
Yeah.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about if I come across the border and I am in refugee status, however that's defined, what happens to me when I come to Uganda?
Yeah. Well, and building onto that as well, like the relationships from the olden days. Now, when you cross, for example, to Uganda and you're coming from Rwanda, the initial response, like standard government response, is that if you're crossing, for example, when you're so many people, there's this UN prima facie status they offer you as a refugee. Mm-hmm. The moment you cross, irrespective of whatever the cause may be, literally you get the status of being a refugee. Mm-hmm. Then the politics of how to register you, either through the UN system or the office of the Prime Minister to give you a card, to give you all this, is now the official labeling, if I would say.
Yeah, so we have the UN involved, the Office of the Prime Minister. That's a Ugandan office, I know.
Yeah.
And so you could be registered in either one of those systems or both of those systems?
So it's like a tripartite agreement, and it's always, they work hand in hand. They have one system, but the database is managed by the Office of the Prime Minister in collaboration with the UNHCR. Mm-hmm. Because basically UNHCR provides the funding behind the system. The government is legally supposed to do the registration, but due to so very many reasons, they face several challenges and they need support. Mm-hmm. So that's why even international partners like all USAID grants come in through charities like International Medical Corps, International Rescue Committee come in to support government.
Okay.
But legally, it's a government that should have the database.
Okay, so the government of Uganda maintains a database,
yes.
And then from there, people can start to access services if they need them.
Yes. Basically, let's say today I'm Ugandan and I have an issue in Uganda and I want to cross to Rwanda. If I'm wealthy enough, I just cross to Rwanda. Mm-hmm. No one will ask. Maybe Rwanda might ask, depending on their legal system at times. But let me reverse it and say, if you're coming into Uganda,
okay.
Take, for example, people crossing from Congo and coming into Uganda. When they're financially stable, they even don't need to register anywhere.
Okay, so you just come in and you're okay.
You come in, you buy land, you settle, and you after 20 years, technically you're Ugandan. But if you want assistance from the government and the UN, basically the UN family, if you want assistance, especially the most vulnerable women, girls, children, who are crossing with nothing, especially from war, those ones need support. That's where the institutions come in to say, okay, these people are coming in bulk. They need support. They need health care. They need food, all the amenities that a human being needs. That's when they come in and kind of create shelters at reception centers in Kisoro.
Yeah, I remember us going to the reception center.
Yes.
So there I saw like a bunch of tents and people
Yes.
were living in tents, but they don't stay there long, right?
No, so they come in at the reception center. At most, it should be like within a month, they have moved you further into the country because you're at the border. Whatever conflict you're running from is so close to you, so they have to move you to a safer place. So they move you deeper into the country to what we call settlements. These settlements are plots of land. Every refugee is given land.
You're given land.
Yes, you're given land to cultivate and build your house on it. And basically the building can be mud and water, plastic tarpaulin provided by either WFP or UNHCR, and you put up a building. Doesn't restrict you from what you build. I think we've gone to Nakivale and you've seen shops that are even busier than the national shops.
Amazing.
It's like a whole town.
Yeah, like a town unto itself. And I remember when we were in Nkavale, you literally, based on how you move around, there are different ethnicities.
Yes.
So I think there were some people from Sudan. We met your friend from
Somalia,
Kenya,
yeah.
from Somalia.
Yeah.
I'm guessing from Congo as well.
Yeah.
That whole concept of two things, I guess. One, we give people land. We don't say to them, you can never own land.
Yeah.
And the other is, it's not about providing bags of rice. It's not about providing, long-term, we're going to feed you, although that happens. I know our friend James has worked with the World Food Program, but it's also helping people become more sustainable.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it also comes from the history, because Uganda is proclaimed to have the best refugee policy. It's not just hearsay, it's a fact. And given the history of our governments and the turmoil that happened immediately after independence, we had our own leaders flee, current leaders. Like, I would say close to, if not 90% of the revolutionary leaders that fought the liberation war of the 80s were refugees in Tanzania, in Kenya, and Rwanda.
So they went to seek
asylum as young guys who were pushed out because of their political views. Likewise, the Rwandese of the 50s, that's what they don't, mostly people don't talk about the 51 genocide that happened and pushed Rwandese into Uganda. That's where the kinds of, the president of Rwanda, Paul Kagame, became a refugee as a kid in Uganda, studied in Uganda. So that history, Museveni was a refugee in Tanzania, informs the 95 Refugee Act, because they have been there. They know what it feels to be a refugee. So when they came back, and it has also different undertones because there were so many other different nationalities within Uganda, especially people from Rwanda who are not considered Ugandan, but then they went ahead and put it in the law, in the constitution, that they are Ugandan. So that informs the policy and the practice of why the attitude towards refugees is good or is more receptive. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was fascinating for me to go to the place in Nkavale where there were, I guess, 120,000 people were in refugee status, but spread out, living in communities, seemingly maybe not happy, but content there. They could travel. They were not restricted for travel. I remember that there were people who were going to travel down to Kampala or travel to another city to visit. Pretty much goes. It is in direct opposition to what we see here in the States, where somebody, first of all, needs to figure out how to cross the border, and we have legal crossings and illegal crossings. And then when you get here, we often don't treat people very well. Especially when it comes to social services. And I think that the balance that that Uganda seems to have is, as an American looking in, I really wish we could see those kinds of things. I'm sure it's not perfect, but there's something positive about it. So if somebody wants to say, okay, I'm in a refugee camp, but I want to leave the refugee camp, and they have the resources to do that, they're free to go?
Yeah. So, well, and that's the other thing, that the policy, the refugee policy, doesn't restrict you to stay in the camp. If you have money, if you have skills, you can come into Kampala and start your life normally living as any other Ugandan. Actually, now that's where very many people, especially if you take, for example, a refugee from a city in Congo, like Kinshasa, and you find yourself a refugee in Uganda, your life, you're born, raised in a city, you don't know rural kind of village life. So you're bound to find it easier to survive in the city. So most people who come in as refugees from cities, be it the Somalis, end up in the city. And those who come from rural settings end up to go into the settlements because they're used to farming and all that. So when they're coming into the city, they do all sorts of work, from casual labor to merchandise and some have been very prominent, like very rich. Some have become very rich. Your famous Cafe Java's place is run by
my
Somalis.
favorite restaurant and restaurant chain in Uganda. Anybody ever goes to Uganda, you need to go to Cafe Java's.
It's run by Somalis, and he was a former kind of refugee who came to Uganda, businessman. But most Somali refugees find themselves in the transport, and he's providing lots of jobs. So that's the interesting bit about our law differentiates from the UN family protection law, because the UN basically says we'll provide for you services in a specific location and a gazetted area internationally. So that's why we have, in different countries like Kenya, we have camps, refugee camps, and even in the Middle East, or globally, you'll find people in camps where they're all put in together. In Uganda, you have settlements. You don't have camps.
So I know that we've seen recently camps in Ethiopia, where people came from, I think, Somalia. They would have come from. So really, those don't exist in the same sense, other than that entry camp, or the where you get screened in the beginning.
Actually, we'll call it a reception center.
Reception center.
Yes.
I was grasping for the word. I want to talk about two specific issues that come up, and they're really near and dear to Heart Sounds. One is health, and the other is education. So somebody coming in as a refugee, how do they get their health services?
One, if, for example, you decide to stay in the city centers, I would basically say you're on your own.
Okay. So you find your doctor on
You
your own.
find your way around the Ugandan health system, basically. You look for any support like any other Ugandan, which is challenging for people who have come in as refugees. Because you will have to basically fight for the meager resources that already are limited, as the Ugandan health sector itself has lots of challenges. So you're coming in and adding on the challenge, especially in the towns. For the rural community, the refugee settlement areas, those are provided support through the UNHCR system. So UNHCR supports the existing, in collaboration with the government, because there are government health centers already established in the refugee settlements or in the neighboring community.
So we would find a health center similar to what we find in Nyanja or whatever, with different levels, and then if you need to go to the hospital, you go to one of the regular hospitals, and eventually might land up at a referral hospital or something like that. So you become pretty integrated into the system.
You get the same services as a Ugandan.
Remind me, do you pay for your health services in Uganda?
No, we don't. You only pay especially for the private, if you have enough money and can afford private care. Those are private hospitals in the cities. Like any other third world or developing nation, there are several challenges in the healthcare system. But healthcare is free.
Healthcare is free.
Yeah.
Well, you've been in the United States for a while. You see, healthcare is not free here.
No.
We sort of struggle with that. So people need to find their own way.
Yeah.
Maybe there's some organized parts to the system, maybe not.
Yeah.
How's that viewed in terms of a stress on the community? So I'm here as a refugee, and now I want to go to this for the same health services you get.
Exactly.
What's the response to that?
Well, the irony is that in the settlements, in the rural areas where they're given land and settle like any other villager, the fact that UNHCR supports and supplements these hospitals that provide services for the refugee settlements, they have better health care
Okay.
in those hospitals
Yeah.
than in other national, say, health center tools in the community. So you'll find even nationals actually coming to the refugee health center to get better health care.
Okay.
Because you'll definitely get drugs there. You'll definitely have a doctor there at health center 2 level, 3, even a lower level, because they're in the refugee settlement and UNHCR is supplementing.
Yeah, I think we actually visited one of those in Orochingo one day.
Yes.
The health center. And just so for definition purpose, national Ugandan citizen.
Oh, yes.
Refugee, not Ugandan
Not
citizen.
Ugandan.
But also you mentioned that after a certain number of years you become Ugandan.
Yes.
Yeah.
The moment, if you stayed in Uganda for more than 20 years, you apply and you become a citizen. It's more of a technicality than the actual practice.
Okay.
The moment you cross the border and buy land and you settle comfortably with your neighbors and you don't create you're not part of a rebel group, you're as Ugandan as any other Ugandan.
Okay.
We've had even some who haven't spent so many years become leaders in the Ugandan community.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it goes back to the history that we have a history of blood relations with these neighbors.
Yeah, we're sort of in the U.S. when I know that in Uganda there's 57 tribes or something like that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that people belong to, and I'm guessing people belong to tribes in their home countries as well.
Yes, we have in East Africa, according to the last census, we have about 57 tribes. But these 57 tribes are basically grouped into like 4 big communities. The Bantu, the Nilotics, the Hamites. And so but within these big tribes, it's so distinctive that you could drive 100 meters and cross into a different tribe that you never even understand their language.
Wow. Yeah. So different dialects.
Different
dialects.
Language totally, not even a dialect, but entirely the language. It's like French and English.
Well, that's a good transition to the second topic, which is education. The national language in Uganda is
English.
English. So,
Former British
everybody
colonies.
learns English.
Yes.
So now I come in as a refugee, a child.
Yeah.
I'm 4 or 5 years old. It's time for school.
Yeah.
Where does school occur?
So one is they assimilate you into the schools within the community. Say you come in and there is a school in that refugee settlement, then you attend the school as any other Ugandan student. And in the settlements, there is no distinction between a Ugandan and a refugee because all of you attend the same school.
Okay.
There's no discrimination. Even in the cities, you go to school. There's what they call universal primary education, which is free for everyone in government-provided schools.
Yeah. And so you could actually go all the way through university level.
Yes.
Yeah. And I know we have our friend John Dow, who came from Sudan as a refugee.
Yes.
Eventually came to the United States under a program
A resettlement
a
program.
resettlement program,
Yeah.
is now a U.S. citizen and a important part of Heart Sounds, which we're very glad to hear. So we've talked about a bunch of things, but those last two, health and education, I think we covered some issues about food. So it seems to me that no one goes really hungry in Uganda. There were certainly some challenges during the pandemic and challenges during other times.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on that? Do the food programs work?
Well, it's interesting. Just a scenario that happened in one of the refugee camps that we used to live in. It's in Nakivale in Hoima.
Mm-hmm.
And World Food Program used to provide food. This corn, basically USAID corn, the bags that are written on.
Yeah.
And it would, because they have limitations on funding, so the trucks would come half full and they distribute the maize. But the land in Nakivale, rather in Hoima, Changwali, is so fertile that the refugees have planted lots of gardens of maize.
So they don't need this.
So the drivers would take back full trucks for business.
That is quite amazing.
And it was always ironical, these people don't need the food.
For sure.
Find something else.
Yeah.
But the politics behind the food was beyond our control. Yeah.
Well, JP, you said it was going to be hard to fill the 30 minutes, but we're almost there.
Sure.
Believe it or not.
Okay.
So I think this was a great opportunity for us to, first for you and I to discuss things that we've talked about now over 10 years.
Yeah, sure.
And I had the opportunity to visit at least two the refugee camps or settlements. Shouldn't call them camps, the settlements, and see how that system works. Now, again, not suggesting they're perfect systems, but they're certainly very different than what we're used to in the United States.
Yeah.
Heart Sounds is working on a number of projects, and we hope that a refugee program will be one of those. We're now a USAID partner, so we're looking forward to doing that. You've been listening to In Their Shoes, brought to you here by WMCT-TV here in Marlborough, Massachusetts. Again, we thank them for their support, and we thank all of the listeners for their supports for programs like Heart Sounds. And I'll remind you, certainly visit our website, heartsoundsus.org. Take a look at what we do and consider donating to us. But there's lots of other projects out there as well. If we're not right for you, there's another project out there. So on behalf of my colleague John Paul Agaba, myself, and the members of Heart Sounds, we're going to bid you farewell for today, and hopefully be back. I'll be headed to Uganda a week from Tuesday.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping that my next podcast might even come from Uganda, but if it doesn't, we'll get to talk about a lot of those things. So thank you, John Paul. Thank you to our listeners. Have a great day.